I never imagined a simple notification could change my life. My phone vibrated on the living room table, and when I opened it, I found a photo that shouldn't have been there. My husband was smiling, sitting in a restaurant next to my sister-in-law. The problem wasn't the smile, but the way his hand rested on hers, too tender to be an innocent gesture. I felt my heart race, as if someone had ripped the ground out from under me. The scene seemed straight out of a movie, but it was my reality. I stared at the screen, trying to find an explanation that made sense. It must be a bad angle, I thought for a moment, but the intimacy in their eyes left no room for interpretation. It wasn't just a family lunch. It was something more, hidden behind the facade of normality. Anger surged through me, mixed with profound sadness. What had been trust until yesterday was now doubt and pain. My stomach churned and I felt my breath catch. It wasn't a suspicion floating in the air, it was proof before my eyes. For a second, I closed my eyes and wanted to believe I was wrong, but the image repeated itself like a silent punch. In that moment, I realized I needed answers, and perhaps what came next would be even worse than that first scene. What I didn't know was that that photo was just the tip of something much darker. I remember exactly how everything began to change. Small things, almost imperceptible to an outsider. He no longer left his phone lying around the house. Before, he'd leave it on the table, on the sofa, even forget it in the car. Now, the device felt like a state secret, always in his pocket, always with the screen facing down. At first, I didn't want to pay it any attention. Who hasn't been more reserved with their phone? But something bothered me. The password changed without telling me, the way he always rushed to receive a notification. It was as if each vibration was a secret code I couldn't decipher. And it began to eat away at me inside. I remember one time we were watching TV in the living room. His cell phone dinged, and instinctively, he jumped up and went to his room to answer it. When he returned, he pretended nothing had happened. But his haste betrayed more than any words. I stared at him, smiling and thinking, "Who are you now?" Our routine also began to change. Breakfasts, once filled with conversations about plans, became silent. He fiddled with his cell phone while I talked about my day, as if in another world. I found myself beside a man who was physically present, but absent in everything else. It was like sharing a table with a stranger. It was then that I noticed a subtle change in his appearance. Different perfumes, more polished clothes than usual for simple work meetings. Even his haircut seemed more thought out. Small signs that, for those in love, are silent cries. But he swore it was just belated vanity, a phase of self-care. Excuses also began to multiply. Last-minute meetings, unavoidable commitments, short trips to take care of business. I knew part of it was true, but something inside me told me there was more. The problem was that each excuse was laced with impatience, as if I were to blame for being suspicious. One day he said he was going to lunch with his coworkers. I thought it was strange because it was a Saturday. When I asked, he replied curtly, "You complicate everything. It's just lunch." That phrase echoed in my head. It was the same excuse he would use days later when that photo appeared before my eyes. On that particular Saturday, he came home later than usual. He came smiling, carrying a gift bag of sweets, as if sugar could sweeten the lie. I accepted it, thanked him, but doubt was already planted deep within me. His smile wasn't that of a transparent man. It was the smile of someone hiding something. It was also at this point that I noticed the physical distance, the touch, the affection, the lingering hugs. All of that gradually disappeared. The goodnight kiss became an automatic gesture, devoid of warmth. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue, that age brings changes, but the truth is, my heart knew. There was another energy at play. Deleted messages on my phone were the trigger for my restlessness. One night, by accident, I noticed his history was clean. There were no old conversations, not even those routine work ones. It was as if he'd started from scratch. And no one does that without a reason. This detail kept me awake for days. I began to observe his clothes more closely. One day, while folding a shirt, I caught a scent that wasn't mine. It was delicate, floral, feminine. The kind of detail any woman recognizes instantly. When I asked, he laughed and said it must have been from the store or the elevator. A quick excuse, but one that didn't convince me. I also remember his strange relationship with the gym. He started going at different times than usual, always alone. Before, we used to go together, but suddenly he'd come up with customized workouts that, he said, wouldn't work for me. Another space where he withdrew and created an inaccessible territory. I tried to hide the pain. She worked, took care of the house, met with friends, but deep down she was always paying attention to the details. A forgotten receipt, an unread notification, an untimely comment. His life became a puzzle that I tried to piece together in silence, piece by piece. The most painful part was the manipulation. When I brought it up, he became irritated. He said I was too suspicious, that I was ruining our peace. The classic reversal. I, the victim, became the one to blame for ruining the relationship. This game made me question my own sanity. The family also began to notice the distance. My mother commented that he always seemed rushed, with a distant look in his eyes. My sister noticed he avoided certain conversations. I tried to justify it, made excuses, because I wasn't yet ready to admit the truth. It was like protecting the lie so as not to face reality. One night, we were driving back from dinner at a friend's house. In the car, I noticed he was gripping his phone tightly, as if afraid I would take it. When I asked if everything was okay, he responded with a dry, almost automatic, yes. I didn't insist, but the answer was already clear inside me. No, everything wasn't okay. One Sunday, while tidying the kitchen, I found a folded receipt in his pants pocket. It was from a restaurant we'd never been to together. The date coincided with a day he said he'd be in the office. I held that paper like a weapon. But it wasn't the final proof. It was just another piece of the puzzle. Even so, I put the receipt in a drawer. It was the beginning of my silent archive. I knew that, at some point, I would need to put all the pieces together and face what was already in front of me. Until then, I needed the strength to continue living my routine, as if nothing were happening. Social media also gave me clues. Likes at odd hours, comments on family photos, interactions that would previously have gone unnoticed. Technology, even when turned off, always leaves traces. And I learned to observe every detail like someone studying a secret map. But the biggest change was within me. I, who had always been calm and confident, began to live on high alert. His every word, every gesture, was analyzed 1,000 times in my head. I was no longer the same. I was becoming a researcher in my own home. I remember a painful detail. He no longer wore his wedding ring often. He said it was uncomfortable, that it bothered him at work. But I knew that ring was a symbol, and his abandonment meant much more than a simple inconvenience. It was as if he were slowly erasing our history. One morning, I received a call from him saying he would be working overtime. Later, I discovered that no colleagues were in the office. This kind of lie hurt more than any argument. It was simple, everyday, and showed how much I was no longer part of his world. Even in the face of all this, I still clung to hope. Maybe it was a phase. Maybe I was going through a personal crisis. The heart insists on believing when it's not ready to accept the pain. But reason was already screaming inside me that something was terribly wrong. I began to notice the small silences during family dinners. He and my sister-in-law would exchange quick glances, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention. But I saw them. I always saw them. And each glance was like an open wound in me. Yet no one suspected a thing. Apparently, we were the perfect couple, the close-knit family. Outward appearances remained intact, but I knew that behind his smile lay a shadow that was growing and that sooner or later would surface. There was also the car incident. He said he was going to the grocery store, but when I checked the tracking app, I realized he was in another part of town. I didn't say anything at the time, but that silent confirmation gave me more certainty than 1,000 words. It was as if life was handing me loose pieces, and I had to choose between putting everything together or continuing to pretend nothing was happening. I knew I was about to encounter something that would change everything. I just wasn't sure I was ready to deal with the approaching truth. By then, I wasn't sleeping well anymore. I spent hours awake, staring at the ceiling, reliving every detail, every conversation. Fear of betrayal became a constant specter. And the more I observed, the more I realized it wasn't paranoia, it was reality. It was in this state of alert that I found the most symbolic proof. A photo sent by mistake, appearing on the screen like a bolt of lightning. They were together, too close, smiling as if the world belonged to them. The simple caption read, "Family is everything." But I knew that phrase hid a cruel irony. My heart nearly stopped at that moment. I was facing what I feared most, but it wasn't yet everything. Something bigger was about to be revealed, something that would make me see the true extent of the betrayal. And when it did, there would be no turning back. I just didn't know that the next detail to be uncovered would be even more devastating, capable of destroying in seconds everything I believed to be my life. That week, I decided to observe slowly. I already had scattered evidence, but I needed to understand the pattern. I began noticing the messages he received at night. There weren't many, but they always arrived at times when we were together, as if someone were trying to steal a piece of our routine. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, and the way he disguised it was more revealing than any words. One detail caught my attention: the smartwatch he wore. It had always been synced with his phone, but now it had blocked notifications. Before, messages, reminders, even connections would appear. Now it only displayed the time. It was a simple change, but for me, it was a silent scream. He didn't want to leave a trace, not even by accident. One day, when he forgot his watch on the bathroom sink, I grabbed the device like a forbidden key. I noticed that even without visible notifications, there were records of accelerated heartbeats at specific times. Always at night, always when he said he was in meetings. His body revealed what his mouth denied. I also noticed the small delays at work. He said he needed to review extra documents, but the schedules didn't match. I called the office once, and the receptionist said he'd already left. I feigned casualness, hung up, and filed the information away as another piece of information in my mental archive. The lie was no longer just suspicion. It was a cycle. His car became a separate chapter. I started paying attention to the kilometers traveled. He said he only went to and from work, but the numbers on the dashboard told a different story. There were longer routes that didn't fit his stated routine. It was as if he traveled distances to live a parallel life. The most disturbing detail was the smell. In the passenger seat, a sweet, fresh perfume, completely different from mine. It wasn't something I'd made up. It was there, saturated in the fabric, resisting even the smell of the disinfectant we used. I stood in the car for a few minutes, breathing deeply, feeling the pain mix with the certainty. He always liked to have playlists ready on his phone to listen to in the car. One day I noticed a new one, full of romantic songs, completely out of his league. I asked if I should relax in traffic, and he just smiled. That smile said much more than the answer. It was the smile of someone hiding something. Gradually, I realized my own attitudes had changed. I started talking less, observing more. Outsiders thought I was distracted, but in reality, I was connecting the dots. It was a painful exercise because each confirmed detail felt like a slow stab, but I knew I needed to gather my strength before acting. One day, at my mother-in-law's house, I noticed strange behavior. He and my sister-in-law were in the kitchen, laughing about something in low voices. When I entered, silence fell, and we each went our separate ways. The forced naturalness only increased my distrust. I knew my husband well, and I also knew that kind of silence. After that episode, I became even more attentive during family gatherings. The quick glances, the disguised touches, the way they always remained close. It wasn't something obvious, but those who live through the story feel it in their hearts. It was like watching a play where everyone was pretending, except me. One night, when he was already asleep, I grabbed his phone to try to figure something out. But this time, the screen asked for facial recognition. He had changed everything. It wasn't just the password. It was completely blocking any access to it. The message was clear. This space is no longer yours. And that cut me deeper than if I had seen the actual proof. The detail that struck me was the distance he maintained at home. He would spend hours in the bathroom carrying his phone with him. Even brushing his teeth seemed like a time-consuming ritual. I would stay in my room, listening to the water run, imagining what he was typing on the other side of the door. That invisible barrier suffocated me every day. I also noticed he changed the way he spoke to me. Conversations were more dry, as if I were an obstacle. Even when I asked about simple things like his work schedule, he responded with short sentences. A relationship doesn't end suddenly. It falls apart, and I felt each piece slip through my fingers. At work, my colleagues began to notice my sadness. They asked if everything was okay, and I replied that I was just tired. But deep down, I was already broken. Pretending to be normal was harder than dealing with the suspicion. I needed to maintain my image, but inside, I just wanted to scream. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to turn on his computer. It wasn't something I usually do, but curiosity got the better of me. To my surprise, it was practically empty. No history, no documents. It was as if he'd wiped everything clean. This lack of information spoke louder than any hidden file. However, I found a forgotten detail. A calendar reminder for family lunch, 1 p.m. It was the same day as the photo I'd received. Family lunch was the perfect excuse for the fantasy. And now I had the connection between lie and image. The shock of that realization made me tremble for minutes. At that point, there was no denying it. I didn't just have suspicions, I had pieces that fit together. Perfume, receipts, silences, glances, apologies. It was like piecing together a painful puzzle, where the final image was the betrayal I'd always feared. And yet part of me still wanted to believe I was wrong. I spent nights remembering how we used to be. The family trips, the future plans, the conversations on the couch. It was hard to accept that the man who shared everything with me now carried a hidden life. I wondered at what point I stopped being enough. This was the cruelest pain of all. Amidst this turmoil, I tried to seek support. I told a close friend, who listened silently. When I finished, she simply said, "You know what you need to do, but you're not ready yet." And she was right. I needed to gather my courage before facing the abyss of truth. The evidence began to grow stronger when I noticed the spending on the card. Small purchases in places we'd never been before. Dinners paid for at restaurants outside our usual routine. He said they were for meetings, but I already knew they were encounters of a different kind. Money also left traces. One day, while cleaning the laundry, I found a shirt with a makeup stain on the collar. He swore it was street dirt, but I could tell it was lipstick. It was like being hit with a silent punch. I didn't need to argue, I just tucked the details away in my evidence list. Even in the face of everything, I still tried to keep the house running. She prepared meals, organized appointments, pretended nothing was happening. Because part of me wanted to observe until the end, wanted to catch the exact moment he could no longer deny it. I didn't want assumptions, I wanted certainty. One rainy afternoon, when he said he had a meeting, I decided to test it. I called a colleague of his, asking if they were together. On the other end, the silence was uncomfortable. After a few seconds, the colleague said, "He's not here, he left early." That answer was the final blow to the illusion I still had. After that, I started recording everything. Photos, receipts, schedules, distances. It was my private file, saved in a secret folder on my computer. I knew that at some point I would need all of this. Not just for myself, but to prove that I wasn't making anything up. The cruelest part was living with him, knowing everything, sharing the bed, the coffee, the fake smiles. It was a daily theater in which I performed in silence. Each morning was an effort not to explode, to wait for the right moment to reveal what I already knew. It was during this period that my health began to suffer. Sleep disappeared. My appetite diminished. I lived in constant tension, waiting for the next detail to emerge. It was like living in an endless suspense, where the next scene could be the most painful of all. But fate doesn't wait. And when I least expected it, the revelation came brutally. Clear, undeniable proof, impossible to explain. Something that tore away the curtain of doubt and threw me into the harshest reality I could face. My heart knew I was close to the limit. I just had no idea that the next discovery would not only confirm everything, but also reveal the darkest side of who I thought I knew. And it was in that heavy silence that I realized the lie wasn't just in the present, but hid an entire past I could never have imagined. That night, I sat alone in the living room, observing the heavy silence of the house. His cell phone was charging on the coffee table, but protected by barriers that kept me away. I no longer needed to hack into anything. The evidence was already everywhere. What was left for me was to summon the courage to face it. The loneliness of knowing and not being able to speak was unbearable. When he returned from his shower, he feigned normality. He sat next to me, flicked on the TV, asked about my day. I responded in short sentences, maintaining the disguise that had become routine. He didn't notice my gaze, or chose not to. Living next to someone who lies is like inhabiting two parallel worlds. Family gatherings became a spectacle difficult to watch. I observed his every gesture with my sister-in-law, the hands touching briefly as they passed a plate, the glances that lingered a second too long. To others, no big deal. For me, every detail was a stifled scream. I remembered how, years ago, those same meetings had been my refuge. Loose laughter, long conversations, complicity. Now, every laugh sounded fake. Every hug seemed rehearsed. It was as if everyone was blind except me. The feeling of being the only one who saw gnawed at my chest. One day during lunch, I noticed she was wearing a necklace I'd seen in a store before. I remember talking to him about buying that same gift, but I never did. Now, the necklace gleamed around her neck. My mind had no doubt. He had bought it. It was another piece fitting into the puzzle. His delays became increasingly frequent. Extra hours at work, meetings that popped up out of nowhere. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. His routine was carefully crafted to fit within two lives, the official one with me and the parallel hidden one, which was now impossible to ignore. I was trying to maintain my dignity. I kept my appointments, going to work, smiling at the neighbors. But inside, each step was a weight. My body was tiring, my mind wouldn't shut off. I lived with the feeling of playing a character, and each day the role became more difficult to sustain. One night in the bedroom, he fell asleep before me. I saw his face relaxed, peaceful, as if nothing were wrong. The contrast revolted me. How can anyone sleep peacefully knowing what they're doing? I turned over on the other side of the bed, choking back tears, powerless for anything else. Social media continued to reveal details. A like here, a comment there, always subtle. But when I saw that they had photos taken in the same place, on different days, the connection was automatic. It wasn't a coincidence. They were together in the same spaces, they just weren't seen side by side in the posts. I no longer needed explanations. The truth was obvious, yet he still denied it, even with his gestures. When I looked him in the eye, he looked away. When I asked simple questions, he answered quickly. It was as if his own guilt betrayed him, but he still tried to shield himself behind the lie. The weight of carrying this secret alone consumed me. Sometimes I considered telling someone in my family, but the fear of destroying everything held me back. After all, once the truth was told, nothing would ever be the same again. And I didn't know if I was ready to see so many masks fall. The most painful thing was remembering our old promises. "We'll never have secrets," he'd say. Now, every word echoed like cruel irony. It was as if I'd believed a character, and his true face was only now being revealed. This feeling of deception gnawed at me. Objects also told stories. One day, rummaging through his backpack, I found a parking ticket from a distant neighborhood. It wasn't his place of work, nor his friends. It was a trivial detail, but revealing. The lies were all there, hidden in papers he considered unimportant. That same week, I noticed a different care with his clothes. He even wore perfume to go grocery shopping. He wore shirts he'd previously only worn at special events. When I commented, he'd just smile, as if it were normal. But I knew he wasn't dressing up for me. I started talking less and observing more. It was as if my life had become a full-time investigation. Every detail mattered. Every movement could be a clue. I was no longer his wife. I was a spectator to the double life he led, unaware that I was already in on it. Sometimes I found myself wishing I was wrong. I wished it was just a misunderstanding, my own paranoia. But with each new discovery, hope faded a little more. There was no going back, and I knew it. Cheating was no longer a hypothesis, it was a fact. I remember a dinner where he seemed happier than usual. He joked, smiled, told stories. But I knew that joy didn't come from us. It was a reflection of another life, another relationship that nourished him. And being there, watching, was like being an unwitting accomplice to his own pain. It was at that same dinner that I noticed my sister-in-law's gaze. She avoided looking me directly, always busy, always looking away. Guilt lurks in her eyes, and I saw it. I knew she carried the same secret, but unlike me, she didn't seem willing to let it go. It was a silent pact between them, one that kept me out. His excuses became so automatic they lost their power. Traffic, work, meeting. I could predict the phrase before I even heard it. It wasn't about believing it or not anymore. It was about bearing the weight of hearing the lie repeated. And each time he spoke, something inside me broke a little more. His body betrayed it too. I noticed discreet marks on his skin, small scratches on his arm, a faint scent lingering in his hair. These weren't coincidental marks. They were signs of closeness. And each sign was another confirmation added to my silent archive. At that time, I saw no way out. Either I faced it once and for all, or I would continue living in the theater. But to face it, I needed strength I didn't yet have. It was like standing on a cliff, looking down, knowing I'd have to jump at some point. One morning, he left early, saying he had a work commitment. Shortly after, I received a message in the family group, a photo of him and his sister-in-law together, smiling. There was nothing explicit, but for me, it was enough. The detail was in the gestures, in the way they leaned toward each other. It hurt like a knife. I spent the entire day with that image in my head. I tried to work, but I couldn't concentrate. It was as if the world around me had stopped, and only the photo was moving. I watched it over and over, as if hoping to find a detail that would change the story. But there was none. Time seemed to drag on. Each hour was a burden. I wondered how long I could bear to live like this. The silence inside me was deafening, and the urge to scream grew stronger with each passing day. I knew the situation would soon explode, whether through my own words or through some carelessness on his part. People close to me began to notice my change. They commented that I was more distant, quieter. I just smiled, as if nothing were wrong. But deep down, every comment was a reminder that I wasn't the same anymore. I was living an invisible internal war. It was then that I decided I needed a strategy. I couldn't rush. I couldn't act solely on anger. I needed to choose the right moment, the right detail, the proof that would be impossible to deny. It was the only way to end that cycle without any doubt. But before I could plan, something happened. A banal, everyday detail that opened the door to the ultimate shock. It wasn't a scene from a movie. It wasn't anything grand. It was a simple, ordinary gesture that revealed more than any investigation could reveal. And in that moment, I realized that the truth could no longer be hidden. It was there, before me, clear, cutting, ready to transform my life forever. That morning, I woke up before him and went downstairs to make coffee. The routine seemed the same as always, but inside me, there was a different weight. As I was making coffee, I heard his phone vibrate on the nightstand. The sound echoed like an alert. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but my intuition wouldn't let me. I slowly went upstairs and saw the screen light up. It was a notification about photos syncing to his email. He never used that feature, so it immediately caught my attention. I didn't touch the device, but the information stuck in my mind. My whole body reacted, as if I already knew what I would find. Hours later, when he left for work, I turned on my computer. I accessed our family account and searched for the syncs. Among the common files was a new, unnamed folder. I opened it and felt my heart race. The images were there, like a cold, direct shock. The photos weren't explicit, but they said more than any words could. They were records of simple encounters, lunch, coffee, a parked car. Small moments that, together, formed concrete proof of what I already knew. He was building memories with someone else, while destroying ours. One image in particular paralyzed me. It was at the restaurant he said he frequented with coworkers. Beside him, my sister-in-law smiled, her hand on his. The naturalness of the scene was what hurt the most. It wasn't an affair, it was intimacy, as if they were an assumed couple. I closed the computer and stood still for minutes. The kitchen was silent, only the clock ticking. I felt a mixture of anger and emptiness. There was no denying it anymore. What had once been suspicions were now proof. The truth was before me, raw and unbearable. Throughout the day, I tried to act normally. I went to the grocery store, ran my errands, chatted with acquaintances. But inside, the scene from the photos kept repeating itself. I smiled on the outside and bled on the inside. Every word he said seemed rehearsed because nothing was real anymore. That night, he arrived in high spirits. He talked about work, commented on the traffic, ordered a special dish for dinner. His calmness revolted me. How could someone act so calm when they've been hiding their entire lives? I looked at him and realized the lie was already part of who he was. Over the next few days, I started saving copies of the images. I created a protected folder out of his reach. I knew I needed to be prepared for the moment everything came to a head. The evidence wasn't just my weapon, it was also my shield against gaslighting that he always tried to use. I started to notice small details that I had previously ignored. The excessive care when choosing clothes, the quick departures to answer calls, the way he always rushed out of family gatherings. Nothing was by chance. Everything was part of a silent script that I was already deciphering step by step. I remember one time we were at dinner with friends. He, as always, kept his cell phone facing down. At one point, it vibrated and he quickly got up, saying he was at work. I stared at his empty chair while inside anger burned me. Everyone believed except me. Little by little, I started to change too. I talked less, observed more. I started writing down dates, times, details. I turned my pain into a strategy. It was the only way to not go crazy. I was no longer just a wife. I was an investigator of the parallel life he thought he kept hidden. One afternoon, I found another clue. Reviewing the card statement, I saw a payment at a discreet hotel in the city. The price was not high, but enough for a night's stay. His justification of accumulated work that day fell apart. The lie was on paper, printed and undeniable. I looked at that record for long minutes. The heart was tight, but the mind was already cold. I knew I needed to put everything together before deciding how to act. If I confronted him too soon, he would turn the tables on me. I needed to wait for the right moment, and that required more strength than I imagined. The nights became long and heavy. I lay next to him, smelling a perfume that wasn't mine. His body rested in peace, while mine burned in silence. How many times have I closed my eyes and begged to wake up from a nightmare that was actually my reality? At work, my concentration disappeared. I read documents without absorbing anything. I forgot simple appointments. My colleagues asked if everything was okay, and I just said I was tired. How can I explain that my life was falling apart in my own home? It was a pain that I carried alone. One Sunday, we went to my mother-in-law's house. Once again, I saw the quick glances between him and my sister-in-law, disguised to others, but clear to me. It was like watching a thriller movie in slow motion. With each detail, my anger grew, but I remained silent, gathering strength. It was at that lunch that I noticed another detail: the wedding ring. He no longer used it. I justified it by saying that it was uncomfortable, that it was tight. But when I saw the discreet shine of the ring on my sister-in-law's finger, a chill ran down my spine. The piece that was supposed to symbolize our commitment was now in another hand. The shock left me unresponsive for a few seconds. I covered it up. I kept smiling, but inside my mind was screaming. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an affront, a silent humiliation in front of the entire family. How come no one noticed? Or would everyone prefer to pretend? That day, I returned home with a heavy body. Every movement felt slow, like I was carrying tons of pain. I closed the bedroom door and cried in silence, without him noticing. I no longer cried out of sadness, but out of indignation. It was different. And inside me, something started to change. I realized that I was no longer afraid of the truth. On the contrary, I wanted it to come to light at once. Living in silence was crueler than facing it. I needed to turn that pain into a decision. But first, I wanted to understand how far he would be able to go. I started following him discreetly within a few days. Not physically, but through the traces he left. Applications, receipts, posts. Technology became my ally. And the more I watched, the more I realized that his double life was carefully planned, but never perfect. There was always a flaw. One of these flaws arose from a simple notification, a confirmed restaurant reservation sent by email. It was for 2 people, on a date that coincided with an invented work commitment. I printed that email and kept it with the photos. My evidence folder was complete. Looking at that file gave me a strange sense of power. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't just pain either. It was the certainty that, when I decided to act, there would be no way for him to escape. Time for manipulation was running out, and I was ready for the confrontation. That night, I ate dinner in silence, watching his every gesture. The way he smiled, the way he talked about trivial things, as if nothing was wrong. I no longer saw the man I loved. I only saw an actor repeating rehearsed lines. And I, the spectator, knew exactly when the play would end. I lay down on the bed and looked up at the dark ceiling. My heart was pounding, But it was no longer just sadness. It was determination. I knew I was at my limit, and that his next action could be the trigger. Something inside me said the end was near. And it was exactly at that moment that a new revelation emerged. A simple, common, but devastating detail. A mistake of his that, unintentionally, gave me the most painful test of all. Something that not only confirmed the betrayal, but revealed how much it was already part of our lives. The revelation came unexpectedly, on an ordinary Wednesday night. I was organizing some documents on the computer when I realized he had forgotten the email open. I don't usually touch anything that isn't mine, but at that moment, curiosity mixed with pain spoke louder. One click was enough for a message to change everything. The email was simple but devastating. It was a reservation receipt at a discreet hotel in the city, with his name and the clear mention of couple accommodation. There was no name for her, but I didn't need to. The context was already screaming. That digital paper was definitive proof that my life was being divided in secret. I felt a cold run through my body. My hands shook so much that I had to put the mouse down for a few seconds. It was no longer just about looks, perfumes, or excuses. It was concrete, written, recorded. The betrayal that once seemed fragmented was now consolidated into letters and numbers before my eyes. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Anger rose like fire, but was soon drowned out by silent sadness. I wanted to scream, but I remained silent. I wanted to destroy something, but I remained seated. It was as if my body had frozen, caught between instinct and reason. I got up and went to the window. Outside, the city was still alive. Cars passing by, neighbors arriving, children playing. Life continued as normal, while inside me everything fell apart. The feeling of being alone in pain was unbearable. Looking at the world outside was like facing cruel indifference. That night, I lay down next to him, and he slept as if nothing was happening. I watched his calm breathing, his relaxed face. How can someone rest in peace while constructing such heavy lies? Anger and disbelief fought inside me. It was hard to believe that this was the same man I had built a life with. The next morning, I decided to act coolly. I made my coffee, organized the house, and did my tasks as usual. But inside me, there was a new feeling. Strategy. It was no longer just the betrayed wife. It was someone about to dismantle the charade with evidence that no one could dispute. I spent the whole day thinking about how to expose that. I didn't want a scandal. I didn't want a scene. I wanted clarity, impact, something that left no room for excuses. It was time to change the game. If he saw me as distracted, it would be precisely in distraction that I would find strength. Later that afternoon, I found an even more disturbing detail. The hotel receipt included a note about early check-in, suggesting that he not only met with her, but planned every detail to be together longer. It was a care he hadn't given me in years. It destroyed me in a different way. It wasn't just physical betrayal. It was emotional dedication. He didn't just find himself. He organized himself, made plans, created moments. And every line on the receipt showed me that there was much more to their relationship than I imagined. That same day, I sat on the couch and started reviewing every recent memory. His smile when he leaves the house, his rush to answer messages, his new perfumes, his well-pressed clothes. Everything connected, like pieces of a puzzle that now formed a cruelly clear picture. My sister-in-law was also in my thoughts. I remembered how much I trusted her, how many secrets we shared in the past. The betrayal wasn't just his with me, it was hers with the whole family. The pain had multiple faces, and they were all staring at me at the same time. I decided I wouldn't say anything that night. I wanted to observe. I made dinner, set the table, talked normally. He talked about work, about future commitments, without realizing that I already had in my hands the key to overturning every word. It was one of the greatest performances of my life. Halfway through the meal, he smiled at me and asked if I was okay. I answered yes, calmly, almost coldly. Inside me, I wanted to scream in his face that I knew everything. But I preferred to wait. The right moment would come and it would be devastating. The following nights were torment. I slept little. I woke up with my heart racing. Every time I looked at him, I saw not just my husband, but the traitor who carried on a secret life within my home. And this duality destroyed me little by little, day after day. On one of those days, I had the courage to organize all the tests. I opened my computer and created a secret folder. There, I kept the photos, the receipts, the card records. Each file was like a knife, but it was also my shield. When the time came, there would be no escape. It was painful to review everything at once. The images, the receipts, the details. But it was also liberating. Pain turned into clarity, and clarity into strength. For the first time, I felt like I had control of the situation, even though I hadn't made the final decision yet. I started imagining scenarios. She thought about confronting him alone, about telling her family, even about presenting her with irrefutable evidence. Each idea had its weight, but they all gave me the same certainty. The end of the farce was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. One morning, as he was getting ready to leave, I noticed one more detail. He looked at himself in the mirror with unusual care, adjusting his tie like a teenager about to meet someone special. And when it left the strong perfume in the air that I no longer chose for myself. I spent the day remembering that scene. It was small but revealing. His manner was not that of someone going to a meeting, it was that of someone going on a date. And this contrast gnawed at me. I knew I needed to act before the pain turned into something irreversible inside me. At work, I could barely concentrate. I wrote reports without focus, answered phone calls without paying attention. My mind was caught up in what I had seen, what I had kept. It was as if everything else had lost importance. Betrayal had taken over every space in my life. When I got home, I found him on the couch, quietly watching TV. His naturalness was almost an insult. How can someone hide so much and still look so light? I sat next to him, silent, just watching. He didn't notice, but I recorded every detail in my memory. The conversations also changed tone. He spoke less to me, but when he did, he used automatic phrases. It was busy, I'm tired, a lot of pressure at work. Words that sounded hollow, weightless, truthless. I no longer believed in anything. Every syllable seemed rehearsed. One night, while he was sleeping soundly, I decided to open his wallet. Among the cards and documents, I found a crumpled restaurant receipt. There was nothing special, except for the detail of the date. It was the same day he said he was in an evening meeting. Another lie that added up. I kept that paper along with the rest. My collection of truths grew, and with it also grew the certainty that the time was coming. It was no longer just about knowing, it was about taking action. With each test, I felt my anger transform into energy. I started to notice the effect this had on me. I didn't cry as much as I used to. Now, my gaze was firmer, my posture harder. He didn't realize it, but I wasn't the same anymore. I was preparing for something that would change everything. I started avoiding unnecessary discussions. If he got angry, I responded calmly. If he accused me of paranoia, I would just smile. He thought he was winning, when in reality, I was in control of the situation. Patience became my most powerful weapon. Until, on a seemingly normal Sunday, the situation took a new turn. An unexpected phone call brought to light more than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about him and my sister-in-law. It was about something bigger, something that went beyond the limits of marital betrayal. And it was at that moment that I realized the pain I carried until then was just the beginning. What was coming would have the power to completely transform my life in ways I would never be ready to face. The call took place on a sultry Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, finishing organizing lunch, when the landline rang. Almost no one called that line, which already surprised me. I answered, and on the other side was a laboratory employee. She asked if my husband would confirm the removal of a recent exam. For a moment, I didn't understand anything. He never mentioned exams, never mentioned consultations. I politely asked what test it was, and the girl, unaware of my silence, replied, "Complete checkup, requested in his name and accompanied by another member of the family." The blood disappeared from my veins. I quickly thanked him, hung up, and stood there with the phone in my hand. The ground seemed to move. What else could that mean? He not only hid meetings, but also joint consultations. It was as if I was building a solid, organized parallel life in which I never had space. At that same moment, I remembered the days when he would come home tired, claiming that he had gone to the doctor or that he needed to resolve health issues. I never suspected. Now every excuse made sense. He was taking care of something important, but not with me, but with her. I spent the afternoon in shock, pretending normality. He arrived, ate, watched television, napped on the couch. Meanwhile, I looked at him with a mixture of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just physical betrayal, it was complicity. A partnership so intimate that it even crossed the limits of health and routine. In the following days, I got even closer to the papers. I went through drawers, looked for envelopes, and found a test order torn into 4 pieces at the bottom of the backpack. I put the pieces together like someone reconstructing a crime. There was his name, and below, hers as companion. It was impossible to deny it. I felt my legs shaking. Betrayal wasn't just hidden in restaurants or hotels. It was a life together, little by little recorded on papers that he tried to erase. With each test, I felt more injured, but also more convinced that I needed to go to the end. It was at that moment that I realized something even more cruel. My sister-in-law had avoided me for weeks, but when we met, she tried to act too normal. Wide smiles, quick conversations, even exaggerated compliments, as if he wanted to convince me that nothing was happening. But the falsehood overflowed. At the next family lunch, I decided to take a closer look. While everyone was talking, she got up to get something from the kitchen. Minutes later, he also got up. When they came back, their looks were different. They weren't innocent looks. They were the looks of someone sharing secrets. My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral. I no longer just wanted proof. I wanted to catch it. I wanted to expose it. I wanted to destroy the mask in front of everyone. But the right moment was still missing, and I needed to wait. Patience was my ally, even though it cost me sleepless nights. One day, a message surprised me. It was from an unknown number, but clearly sent in error. It said, "It was great today, I can't wait for the next one." There was no name, but the context was evident. My entire body froze. The message was short, but it said more than any speech. I showed the cell phone to a trusted friend, who almost couldn't believe it. "You have everything in your hands," she said. I knew it was true, but I wasn't ready to explode that bomb yet. I needed more clarity, more security. I wanted that when I spoke, no one would dare doubt. His routine began to contradict itself. He said he was at work, but he appeared online at odd hours. The excuse for meetings was repeated so much that it lost strength. Each detail was a loose thread that, when pulled, revealed more of the hidden plot. And I pulled each one of them in silence. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the living room and started leafing through old albums. The photos showed trips, birthdays, smiles from a past that seemed true. The tears fell without me noticing. What else was a lie? Had even our memories been contaminated by falsehood? The next day, he brought me flowers, something I hadn't done in a long time. He smiled, hugged me, said he missed me. But I couldn't believe it anymore. Every gesture seemed rehearsed. Every word sounded like part of a play. The flowers, instead of comfort, were an insult. I also started to notice tiredness in myself. The body is more fragile, the mind is always alert. The weight of the discovery turned into physical exhaustion. I needed to react, but I still held back. It was like carrying a secret larger than life itself. In the midst of all this, I continued to accumulate evidence. I made copies of messages, recorded schedules, kept papers. It was my silent arsenal, my contained scream. He didn't know, but every step he took was accompanied by me, and every mistake he made became a weapon in my hands. There was a night when I thought about waking him up and throwing everything on the table. The photos, the receipts, the papers. I almost did. But I took a deep breath and held it. It wouldn't be in the heat of emotion. I wanted it to be cold, calculated, impossible to reverse. It needed to be accurate. His coldness also began to reveal itself in his gestures. When I hugged him, I felt the distance. When I spoke, he seemed absent. And the more I saw this, the more I understood that there was no going back. Love had been eroded, and what was left was just the lie holding everything together. I started to look at him differently. No longer as a husband, but as a stranger. A stranger who shared my roof, my desk, my bed. Trust no longer existed, and without trust, what is left? The silence between us said more than any argument. It was then that I decided to plan the confrontation. I thought about doing it at home. I thought about getting together with the family. I even considered showing everything in public. The options tormented me, but they also gave me a sense of power. I was no longer lost. I had a choice. At work, the days dragged on. I pretended to be normal, but inside I was boiling. Every hour seemed like an eternity. Every look from people was a reminder that I was hiding a devastating secret. It was exhausting to keep the facade intact. At one point, I thought about talking to my sister-in-law, look her in the eye and ask directly. But I soon gave up. She would deny it, try to reverse it, and I wouldn't have the same advantage I had against him. No, I needed the confrontation to be unique, direct, without gaps. It was at this stage that I realized something scary. My life had become one of waiting. I no longer lived, I waited. I was waiting for the final test. I was waiting for the moment to act. I was waiting for the inevitable fall. Everything in me revolved around that. And then, as if fate had heard my thoughts, the grossest mistake happened. Small, simple, but definitive. A detail that could not be erased, explained, or disguised. And when I saw that, I was sure that the end was closer than ever. What I didn't know was that this detail would not only confirm the betrayal, but would also reveal even deeper consequences, capable of affecting not only me, but the entire family structure. I spent the entire week in a waking haze. Each notification made me hold my breath. I observed the house like someone watching a drifting ship, noting times, names, small contradictions. The feeling was that my life revolved around a single objective: finding out how far the betrayal went. Then, one Tuesday, I found a forgotten note in the glove compartment of his car, with a street and time scribbled in pen. It wasn't poetic at all, just numbers. But for me, it was a cry of confirmation. Meetings were scheduled. I kept the note as if it were an archaeological find and then looked for guidance. I spoke discreetly with a friend who understands this type of situation, and he advised me not to expose anything without having everything organized. I turned this advice into a rule. I started structuring evidence like someone preparing a case. Dinners at home became silent. I served, smiled, and studied his every reaction with each bite. He responded with automatic, rehearsed phrases, as if he were an actor repeating memorized lines. A few days later, a detail changed the course of my investigation. A location message arrived on my cell phone, sent by mistake. The marked spot was in a neighborhood we didn't frequent. I took a screenshot, and days later, I decided to stop by. It was just an ordinary cafe, without luxury, but as I sat down to observe, I saw him quickly enter, look around, and disappear inside. My body froze. That confirmation hit me like a silent punch. After that, I started documenting everything accurately. Photos, prints, dates, times. My file grew every week. It was an arsenal of evidence that made me feel strangely calm, because now I had control. Life, however, wanted to give me another unexpected trick. I received an anonymous call informing me that he and she met every Friday morning. I decided to confirm it with my own eyes and went to the place. That Friday, I saw the two arriving in separate cars, but almost together at the clock. They exchanged restrained smiles and subtle gestures, which to any distracted eye would just be casual. But for me, they were too intimate. I returned home in silence, exhausted but strangely convinced. The confirmation no longer left room for doubt. I sat for long minutes on the sofa, feeling a physical weight, as if I were carrying stones in my chest, but also a flame of justice. The nights became a torment. I slept little. I woke up with my heart racing. Every time she looked at him, she saw two different men, the fake husband and the hidden cheater. It was suffocating. On one of those nights, I regained the courage to open the computer and organize all the tests. I created a secret folder where I kept every record, receipts, captures, prints. It was painful to revisit everything, but also liberating. The pain turned to clarity, and with each click, I grew stronger. I started imagining scenarios. Confront it alone, bring the family together, or even expose it in public. None of these options were easy, but they all showed me one thing. I had choices. For the first time, I felt like the narrative was no longer in his hands. I decided to wait for the right moment, until an unexpected slip accelerated everything. One rainy day, I found an unknown key in his jacket pocket. On the keychain, the name of a building we had never mentioned. I researched and discovered that it was an apartment used for short stays. It wasn't a coincidence. He not only arranged meetings in cafes and hotels, but also had a fixed space for his parallel life. I followed the trail of that key over the next few days. I asked an acquaintance to discreetly check the address. Confirmations came, deliveries, maintenance, records, everything pointed to a well-established parallel routine. The shock was brutal. The betrayal was not episodic, it was structured. There was planning, logistics, complicity. He didn't just live an adventure, but built a life outside of ours. This discovery made me realize that I could no longer put it off. It was time to prepare to expose the truth. I chose a date, organized the tests in chronological order, and wrote down what I would say. I wanted my voice to sound firm, without offense, just with facts. In the following days, I remained calm. I wore my dignity every day like armor. He, without realizing it, continued with his routine, still sure of himself. But it was precisely this arrogance that made him make the definitive mistake. He left his laptop open with a message almost sent. The words were intimate, detailing future plans, confirming everything I already knew. There, I even found the date of a next meeting. With this information, I felt like I finally had the final piece. I saved everything, reviewed tests, wrote my speech, and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt a strange lightness. The weight of doubt disappeared, replaced by the certainty of what I would do. It was as if, by taking control, I had regained part of myself that I had lost in the process. When I reached the end of this preparation, I looked at him again during dinner. He smiled, talked trivially, as if nothing was wrong. I listened to him in silence, knowing I was about to turn the page once and for all. And within me, I understood. By exposing the truth, I would not only reveal the betrayal, but I would also open a door to consequences that would surpass anything I could control. That night, I sat across from him with my mind racing. Dinner continued as usual, but my gaze weighed heavily on every gesture. The sound of the cutlery seemed louder than the words he was trying to say to fill the silence. I no longer needed assumptions. I had solid proof in hand. But I preferred to remain silent, swallow my anger, and just observe. The contrast between my calm and his lie gave me a strange sense of power. He smiled, talked about travel plans, and I almost laughed inside. How can anyone plan for the future when they have already destroyed the present? I let him believe his own act because I knew the stage was about to collapse. With each detail, my certainty increased. There was no return, no possible excuses. But what was yet to come would not just be the fall of the mask. It would be the impact of a revelation capable of changing the structure of the entire family. The next morning, I woke up with a weight on my chest that seemed to never end. He slept peacefully, as if he lived the perfect life. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling, knowing that the farce was more alive than ever inside that house. I picked up my cup of coffee and stood in silence on the porch. The bitter taste reflected what I felt inside. I thought about how many women had already gone through the same thing, ignoring signs that were always in front of their eyes. The memories of all the times I trusted came back like stabs. Every promise of loyalty, every word spoken firmly, now sounded like an empty echo. It wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a betrayal of everything I believed about partnership and family. And it was at that moment that I realized I was not just facing a couple's lie, but a social truth that many prefer not to see. How many will still continue to close their eyes? And if it were you, would you bear it in silence, or would you have the courage to expose the truth?